8 government scientists, dead or missing in just 20 months, all connected to America's most classified programs. Washington, D.C., 2024. The capital of secrets, running on empty corridors at night. Something had begun that nobody in those buildings was ready to acknowledge. On July 4th, 2024, a senior NASA researcher died in Los Angeles at age 61. No autopsy was ever performed, and NASA never made a single public comment. Dr. Webb had spent 20 years working on programs nobody outside the building knew existed. The morning he didn't come in, his colleagues assumed he was sick. Blake plotted the 8 locations on the map and stepped back too. Look at the pattern. She had been an FBI agent for 22 years. Patterns like this did not happen randomly. Carter brought the file to Washington 3 times before anyone agreed to look at it. The official response was the same every time: insufficient evidence to open a formal investigation. Los Alamos handled America's most sensitive nuclear research behind those fences every day. Anthony Chavez walked away from it on May 4th, 2025, and was never seen again. Blake read the case file cover too. Cover in the hallway, because she couldn't wait to sit down. Gazis, 20 months. Every single one connected to classified government programs. He left his phone on the kitchen table, his glasses beside it, his medication untouched. Retired Major General Neil McCasland walked out of his New Mexico home and vanished completely. Carter pointed to the photograph and said, "This man was connected to UAP disclosure programs." Blake looked at the board and said, "They all were." The report used careful language, pattern of incidents requiring further review. Carter had wanted to write something much stronger, but was told to keep the language measured. Jason Thomas disappeared in December 2025 and was found in a Massachusetts lake 3 months later. No cause of death was ever officially confirmed to his family. Blake spread all 8 case summaries across her desk and looked at them together for the first time. Every single one connected to nuclear research, satellite systems, or UAP programs. On December 15th, 2025, the director of MIT's Fusion Research Center was shot dead at his home. The gunman was identified, but the motive was never explained publicly. Carter showed the file to officials who had the authority to act on it. Every one of them read it carefully, then told him to keep the findings internal. The pharmaceutical researcher's house had been empty for 3 months before anyone filed a report. Blake sat outside it and asked herself one question: who decides when this becomes a pattern? His personal effects were recovered, but told investigators nothing they could use. A man connected to classified programs had simply stopped existing and left no explanation behind. Retired Major General McCasland had overseen a $2 billion science program at Wright-Patterson. He was named in leaked documents as an advisor on UAP disclosure. Then he vanished. Blake put the document on the table and said, 8 cases, 20 months, one common thread. The officials read it in silence and then asked her how certain she was of the connection. The MIT researcher had been on the verge of a breakthrough in plasma physics and fusion energy. Someone decided that breakthrough should not happen and acted before it could. 8 photographs on the desk at 3 a.m. Carter had memorized every detail of every face. He was certain of one thing: this was not coincidence, and someone knew exactly what it was. Blake walked into that building, knowing the people inside did not want to hear what she had found. She went in anyway, because 8 people deserved someone who would. The digital lines connecting 8 locations across. America told a story nobody was officially reading. Carter had been trying to make someone read it for 6 months, without success. The Major General had walked into this desert and simply ceased to exist. Blake stood on that highway and tried to understand what could make a man do that. Webb had been working on something he could not discuss with anyone. Outside the building. 3 weeks before he died, he stopped sleeping. His colleagues all remembered that clearly. 20 months. Gazis. One timeline that nobody in authority would formally acknowledge. Carter put it on that screen and watched their faces, and learned everything from their silence. Blake had worked 3 100 years on. Trusted her instincts completely. Every instinct she had was telling her the same thing. This was deliberate and organized. Anthony Chavez had worked at Los Alamos for 11 years, without a single security incident. Then on May 4th, 2025, he walked away from the most secure facility in America and vanished. Webb pulled that file knowing it might answer the question he had been asking for months. What he found inside it was the last thing he ever read in that office. The official statement used 14 carefully chosen words to say absolutely nothing of substance. Blake sat behind the podium and counted every word and noted every omission. Carter showed her the new page in the packing structure because he trusted no one inside. Blake read it once and said, "We need to find Webb before someone else does." 8 scientists, 20 months. Every single one connected to classified programs. The government called each case separate. Carter had proof they were not. Comment: do you think someone is deliberately silencing America's most sensitive researchers? Webb walked those corridors alone for the last time on July 3rd, 2024. The next morning he was found dead, and the autopsy was never performed. The scientist across the table knew something. Blake could see it in every movement he made. He chose his words so carefully it told her more than the words themselves did. Jason Thomas had been missing for 3 months before anyone found him in that lake. The investigation produced a cause of death that satisfied nobody who knew him. Carter ran the database search he had been officially told not to run. What came back confirmed what he had. Suspected for 6 months, all 8 were connected. The archive box Blake needed had been flagged for restricted access 2 weeks earlier. Someone had gotten there before her and removed 3 documents from inside it. Webb had discovered something in his research data that did not belong there. He spent 3 weeks deciding who he could trust enough to tell and ran out of time. Carter put all 8 photographs on that screen and said, "This is not a coincidence." The senior official looked at them for a long time before saying anything at all. The wife of the missing researcher opened the door and said she had been expecting someone. She had been waiting 6 months for anyone official to come and actually ask questions. The satellite image showed something in that desert that had no official explanation attached to it. Carter pointed to it, and the room went very quiet very quickly. Webb picked up the phone to call someone he trusted, then put it back down. He made a different call instead, and that decision may have cost him everything. They met in the packing structure because neither trusted the building anymore. Carter showed her the new page and said Webb knew something before he died. Webb had found a pattern in the satellite data that nobody had authorized him to look for. He spent 3 days verifying it before accepting that what he was seeing was real. The desert where McCaslin disappeared offered nothing, no tracks, no evidence. No answers. Blake stood in it and understood, for the first time, how completely a person could vanish. The contractor spoke for 40 minutes without once looking Carter in the eye. Everything he said was technically deniable and completely damning at the same time. The MIT director had been shot on his front porch at 6 in the morning. Blake walked that street and asked the same question every time. Why him? Why then? Webb copied the files onto the drive knowing exactly what he was risking. He locked it in his desk drawer and was dead within 72 hours. Carter walked that corridor at midnight because the answer was behind that door. The file he found confirmed everything and raised questions he had not thought to ask. Blake had been watching that building for 3 nights before anything moved. On the 4th night, a car she had never seen before arrived at 2 a.m. and left at 4. Carter brought the file to the courthouse because official channels had failed completely. A federal judge agreed to review it the first time anyone with authority had said yes. The evidence board now had 12 connections where it had started with 8. Blake looked at it and said, "The pattern is bigger than we thought and still growing." The medical examiner confirmed what Blake had suspected for weeks. 3 of the 8 deaths shared an anomaly nobody had officially connected before. Carter received the call at 11 p.m. confirming the 9th case had just been reported. He sat in the dark for 3 minutes before he picked up the phone to call Blake. Blake was already in the car, heading to California when Carter sent the new file. She read it on her phone at 90 miles an hour and told the driver to go faster. Webb copied those files, knowing exactly what he was risking by doing it. He did it anyway, someone I'll need them. Carter put the full compiled report on that table and said, "Read all of it this time." Blake watched their faces and counted 6 seconds of silence before anyone spoke. The USB drive had been hidden in the back of Webb's desk drawer for 3 weeks. Blake found it because she looked where everyone else had decided not to. Carter crossed that empty car park at midnight because Webb had asked him to come alone. What Webb showed him in that car changed the direction of the entire investigation. Webb sat at his kitchen table and addressed the envelope to someone he trusted completely. He sealed it, placed it carefully in his jacket pocket, and did not sleep that night. Blake walked toward that building, knowing this conversation would either end the case or end her career. She had made her decision 3 weeks earlier. She was going to finish this regardless. For the first time, all 3 of them were in the same room looking at the same evidence. Webb spread the files on the table and said, "This is what they did not want anyone to find." The recovered data confirmed that all 8 researchers had accessed the same classified database. Blake watched the file names populate and said, "There it is. That is the connection." Webb had not slept properly in 6 weeks since he understood what the data meant. He stood at that window every night because staying still felt more dangerous than watching. Carter walked the federal judge through every case one by one without stopping. She reached the last page and said, "How long has this been sitting without a formal inquiry?" The call Blake received told her the 9th name had just been confirmed as connected. She closed the case file on her lap and said nothing for a very long time after. Carter stood at that podium because every official channel had been exhausted or blocked. He opened the folder and told the press everything, every name, every date, every connection. Webb showed Carter the exact section of the data that had started everything for him. Carter looked at it for a long time and said, "How did this stay hidden for 20 months?" The satellite data map showed 8 locations, and 3 more Blake had not yet investigated. She stood in that empty auditorium and understood the pattern was still incomplete. Carter had spent 14 months building a case nobody in authority wanted to acknowledge. He stood at that window and asked himself the same question every night. How many more? Blake and Carter sat at that witness table and told the Senate everything they had found. The hearing lasted 9 hours and produced more questions than it answered. Webb sat in that gallery and watched the hearing he had helped make possible. He had not expected to be alive to see it, and that thought stayed with him all day. The archive facility held documents that could confirm or deny everything in the case file. Blake arrived at dawn because she wanted to be first through the door when it opened. Carter reached the last page of the compiled report and closed it carefully. Gazis. 20 months. One pattern that had finally been officially acknowledged. They stood at that memorial without speaking for a long time after the others had left. 8 names that deserved to be more than footnotes in a classified investigation report. Webb sat at his desk in normal daylight for the first time in months and breathed. He had done what he could. The rest was now in the hands of people with the authority to act. The case file was officially open. The investigation was formally acknowledged. The work continued. 8 scientists, 20 months, and a question that Washington could no longer pretend did not exist.